has the alternative of both the AGS or the additional on-site green space, all of which is closer and more conveniently located. Now, if someone wants to go for a 4-hour ramble, are they going to go to the common? Well, yes, they may well do. But someone who wants to walk their dog for a short period of time will not have the same reason to. And the key point of that, and you have to consider all of these measures together, is that if you stand back and think about the effect of that, bearing in mind the projection of 3 to 5 persons, it must reduce the likely numbers of additional visitors. Now, what the Council do in their the 2020 HRA is they break down each measure, alternative green space, additional on-site green space and so on, boundary treatment, and they say, well, take this in isolation, it doesn't do the job, secure fencing, etc.
Forgive me, Mr. Bealey, just one point I wanted to pick up on.
Of course, please.
I don't know if you have a dog yourself, but I wonder if either the SANGs or the on-site green space that you mention are sufficient for a 1-hour walk with your dog.
Well, sir, they may or may not be, depending on the characteristics of the dog walker and the dog, I suspect. I'm not inviting you to conclude that no one who, it would be wrong to conclude that no one who lives on this new development will ever go to the common. That's not the case. They will. I know, I'm going to go there. The critical question for you is whether, bearing in mind what we're talking about in the first place, which is an increase of 3 to 5 persons, the provision of this additional green space will significantly reduce those additional visits. And put like that, I would suggest the answer is obviously yes. Now, will it stop everyone? No, I'm not suggesting that it would. But that's not the issue. This is a numbers game. And I suggest you can be satisfied. It is obvious that it's going to have that effect. Now, Mr. Alsbury reminds me, we do have a 3.3 kilometre route, which I take it is about an hour's walk. Well, I mean, it depends. I think, well, it's not far off. But people are going to want to do different things, and some people are going to, of course, some people are going to go to the common. But the projection is without this mitigation, you've got 3 to 5 additional persons. And obviously that number must come down. And for those purposes, questions that are looked at in the Council HRA, like, well, could someone breach the fence? Well, maybe a very venturous 16-year-old might, once every few years. But that's not the issue. The issue is whether this will have the effect of providing significant mitigation to a problem which is, I don't say trivial, but which is already pretty nebulous in terms of the additional visited numbers in the first place, bearing in mind the numbers that are already there. It's only a matter of degree, and this would necessarily reduce that degree very significantly. And in that regard, it is quite striking, I suggest, just to look at what the Waterman HRA says about this at, the references are, so this is the 2020 HRA, 4.2.178, 4.2.179. I don't expect you want to turn it up, but if I just read out the first of those paragraphs. There is now widespread understanding that the attractiveness or function of alternative green space is reduced when situated in such close proximity to the main destination. The use of alternative green space to deflect visitors from more fragile locations is widespread and can be successful, but this is invariably found where development is more distant, beyond 400 metres, and where the green space can intercept people and provide shorter journey, easier access. Well, okay, as the crow flies, this is less than 400 metres in some cases. But in terms of the practical experience of the dog walker or any other walker, it is plainly not. In fact, it's very far in excess of 400 metres for most people. And there is alternative, and the green space will precisely have the effect of intercepting those people or offering a closer alternative. And in those circumstances, whether it's 400 metres as a crow flies is irrelevant. That's the basic point. So that's mitigation in terms of on the site. In addition to that, you then have the mitigation in the common itself, and critically, that includes signage, but also we suggest of significant importance, both wardening and stronger bylaws, existing and/or stronger bylaws, and you have.
Really suggesting that defence bylaws will remain in place when the defence organisation has moved out.
Well, the bylaws are available. I mean, there are two advices from leading counsel, one from me, so I won't commend that to you, but there's also advice from Mr. Morici, they're in the papers, I'll get you the references, to the effect that those powers remain in place for so long as DIO retain ownership, well, certainly at least for so long as DIO retain ownership of the site, which they're not likely to, there's no plans for them to. And the reason, and it's important to say that the bylaw-making powers are available not, and this is set out specifically in my recent advice, which you have attached to our hearing submissions, they're not available only or indeed at all when the site is in military use. When the site is in military use, the MOD, I suppose, from DIO have an unrestricted power to exclude people from the site. They're available when the site is in recreational use and for the purposes of regulating that recreational use. So the bylaw making powers is not there for defence purposes. It's precisely to regulate the use of the common when it's not in use for defence purposes. So, I mean, the answer to Mr. Elvin's question is yes, those powers are available in perpetuity. And they're available under primary legislation, the Stransell Common Act 1884. I mean, if the council disagrees with the advice from both Mr. Morici and myself, then I suggest it needs to set that out in detail and we can consider it. But there's been no pushback on any of that. So there's a combination of a bylaw-making power, which is already used to regulate specifically recreational use, and which can, if necessary, be strengthened. So it could include rules about having dogs on leads or things like that, if that's considered necessary for the protection of the site, for the protection of the common, that is. And that can be accompanied by wardening. And I just remind you of the point I made fairly close to the outset, that Natural England itself identified wardening as the best way to regulate problematic recreational use of the common. So on that basis, in 2014, they were themselves saying it was effective. And there's no reason to think otherwise. And the HRA recognises that it will, to an extent, be effective. So what you have to do, we suggest, if you stand back from that, thinking about that overall likely impact, well, in terms of visitors, we've got an unmitigated 3 to 5 additional persons per hour in the context of already 22 to 34 visitors, 22 or 34 visitors. We've got an inevitable reduction if the on-site mitigation measures are put in place in that number. Now, I'm asking you to reach a firm conclusion on what precisely that reduction will be. I can see that's not possible for you. But you can be satisfied that it will reduce those numbers, and on the face of it, it should reduce it significantly, notwithstanding the detail of the Council's concerns. And you then have to deal with that limited additional number of visitors, the on-site measure, the on-common measures, which, by the way, will deal not only with that additional those additional visitors from the site itself, but also with additional visitors produced by the other site allegations, which otherwise go unmitigated, and they're of a comparable volume to the visitors from this site. 8.6, I think it was 8.6 as opposed to 14. I may have got the numbers wrong. 8.2 rather than 14.6, whatever it was in paragraph. That paragraph, the SACG, paragraph H. And they must affect the behaviour of those people already on the site insofar as they're causing problems. It's not an unreasonable conclusion that that's a form of betterment taken as a whole. And we still don't fully understand how the council can say that the other visitor numbers, who in terms of volume, doesn't matter where they come from, what matters is what they do when they get there, are acceptable from the other site allocations without that additional mitigation, if they're right about this site, because it's a matter of relatively minor degree as to the difference between them. And in those circumstances, and we recognise it's a relatively high test, no reasonable scientific doubt, we say that you can be satisfied to the requisite degree of certainty that this will deal with the issue. There is no real doubt, no reasonable scientific doubt that this will have these impacts. As to the other points that the council makes, fly tipping, vandalism, back gardens, well, all in their different ways, they don't arise. There won't be any back gardens backing onto the common. There's no evidence that vandalism or arson or whatever is more likely to occur because people live within 400 metres. That's a very specific antisocial act. It's not could be done by anyone. There's no reason to think people will do that just because they live nearby. If anything, one might imagine they would do the opposite, but there's no evidence either way. It's obvious in my submission that this development, in accordance, for example, with the master plan, can take place in a way which does not offend the habitats regulations. A badly designed development might cause problems, but a well-designed development won't do so, and you can be satisfied with that. So that, subject, of course, to questions, that's what I wanted to say at this stage.
No, thank you. I think this is a decent juncture at which to take a short break. So I make it 11:30. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 11:50. Thank you.